Well, good morning and happy Sabbath. Welcome to our Sabbath School program. We're so excited that you're here. We know that there are a lot of options Sabbath morning on Video Land, on the virtual platforms, and on social media and on the internet. So the fact that you're here means a lot. We're really glad to have you here. We bring you greetings from the Panama City Seventh-day Adventist Church here in the Panhandle of Florida, the northwestern part of Florida, and we're glad you're here. If you are not visiting us from the Panhandle, if you are not in Panama City, Florida, please let us know where you're from. We would love to get acquainted. Every Sabbath, we've been blessed to have people from every part of the country, north, south, east, west, and it's always a blessing to be able to meet new people. And sometimes we even get people overseas, people as far as Europe. So it's truly a blessing to be able to collaborate and meet new friends and have fellowship with one another through this platform. We are going to continue with our series, Making Friends for God, the Joy of Sharing in His Mission. This is our new quarterly for the third quarter of our 2020 year. It's going to take us clear on into the end of September, and we have a lot to cover. It deals with a lot. Last Sabbath was our first lesson, and it's dealing a lot with the practical components of how to share our faith, how to witness, how to be a tool in God's hands to facilitate people experiencing salvation and transformation. And truly, there really is nothing more important than that. So I think it's definitely a worthy investment of our time to really investigate and explore, become better equipped with this material. This has been the main contributor of this lesson, of course, is Mark Finley. Those of you that know Mark Finley, he's known for his evangelism all over the globe. So definitely somebody that is not just familiar with the theory of soul winning, but someone who's actually lived it himself. So a lot of the material here has been tested and proved. I'm really excited to get into our next lesson, which is lesson number 2, and it's called Winsome Witnessing the Power of a Personal Testimony. The power of a personal testimony. Very, very interesting lesson. But before we proceed, we're going to go ahead and bow our heads, and we're going to ask the Lord's blessing upon our time together. Let's pray together. Father, we are so thankful that we get the honor and privilege of diving into your word, of having the freedom and the privilege to be able to learn and to further grow in our journey of spiritual faith. I ask for a blessing upon our discussion. I ask that you may teach us something new, that we may learn something new, and that possibly you may inspire us even further of sharing our personal stories, not only with those that we seek to allure into faith, but even those that we share faith with. Sometimes we're not even familiar with each other's stories. So give us that inspiration to do that. Bless us to this end is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. So the power of a personal story, the power of a personal testimony. And if you think about it, before we even proceed, it kind of makes sense why we even have an entire lesson dealing with the power of a personal story or a personal testimony. If you notice, those of you that are familiar, actually, it's not just those that are familiar with marketing and publicity, but you will notice that whether it's an ad on the internet, whether it's an ad on TV, whether it's a billboard, whatever the situation may be, normally, 9 out of 10 times, within an advertisement campaign, you usually not only have the promotion of a product, the promotion of a service, but you normally have a personal testimony that goes along with that product, along with that service, in order to do what? To further persuade, to further convince the consumer, the customer, that this product and that this service is definitely worth the investment. Wow. The marketing world has figured this out. It makes sense. And that's why it makes sense also in spiritual terms. Yes, there is, we don't want to call the gospel a product per se. It's really a person. It's really a person. It's Christ. But of course, it's a person. It's a teaching. It's a lifestyle. And the best way of communicating this is not only via, verbal, but it's also with a personal testimony of somebody that has experienced it for themselves. Okay, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful insight, and that's why our memory text, Acts chapter 4 and verse 20. You'll notice a pattern. You'll notice a pattern with a lot of what we're going to be discussing. Acts chapter 4 and verse 20. By the way, if you are interested in looking into a book in the Bible that evangelism pretty much is running through the veins of that book, really you don't have to look elsewhere other than the book of Acts. The book of Acts, it is jam-packed with soul winning. It is jam-packed with evangelism. It's jam-packed with personal witnessing. And that's why you have, of course, church growth. That's why you have a lot of baptisms. That's why you have a lot of, you have evidences of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, because it goes along with a lot of this activity. So, Acts chapter 4 and verse 20, in your memory text, if you have a lesson, it reads this. It says, "For we cannot but speak the things which we have" what? Which we have, if you look carefully, it says, which we have seen and heard. See that? Seen and heard. Now the interesting thing is that seen involves the eyes. That's my bad artistry. Those are supposed to be two eyes, by the way, if you can't see. And heard, of course, involves the ear. That's supposed to be an ear, if you're trying to figure that out. It involves the eyes and the ears. Amazing. So here in Acts chapter 4 and verse 30, essentially, the apostles are basically saying, listen, we can't help it but share that which we have seen and that which we have heard. In other words, you cannot shut our mouth. They tried to keep the church quiet. They tried to keep the apostles quiet, but they couldn't help it. And the reason why they couldn't help it is because they had a daily experience of seeing and hearing. Of seeing and hearing. Okay? Now, this makes a lot more sense, not just in marketing and publicity. Okay? We talked about the advertisement campaign of a product or a service. Of course, either some kind of a food item or maybe a service, maybe a hotel or a restaurant or something of that nature. Whatever the situation may be, normally, in order for a person to qualify as a personal testimony, that individual would have had to have an experience with that product or that service, and usually it involves your senses, right? What you see and what you hear. Now, this is true not only in the world of business, it's also true in the legal world. You understand, okay? Because the word witness, testimony, witness, both of these things, testimony may have more of a commercial component to it, but the witness and testimony actually is not only a commercial, but it's also a legal. You find a lot of this in the court of law. That's why when you have cases and you have the attorneys, you have the defense, you have all of that stuff, you normally have a situation where you have a person that is called to the, you guessed it, the witness stand. Yeah? So the person goes to the witness stand, and why does that person even get summoned to the witness stand? Because that person happened to be at a certain place, at a certain time, that enabled that person to be able to see and to be able to hear certain things that others have not seen or heard. That's why they're called, because they have first-hand experience with an incident that occurred that involved one individual or multiple individuals. This is where the witness stand comes very handy. But of course, if the person wasn't there, if the person was not at the crime scene, if they didn't see and they didn't hear, guess what? They probably will not be summoned to the witness stand because they don't have any valuable information to share that is connected to the big inquiry as to who committed this crime and what actually happened. So these things not only are, as I mentioned, are the concept of a witness, or the concept of a testimony, not only works in the legal sense, in the commercial sense, but it actually even works, and I guess this is somewhat connected to legal, but it even works when it comes to car accidents. Yeah? Sadly, I won't ask you to confess if you've been involved in a car accident before in your driving career, so I'll spare you of that. But I'm pretty sure many of us, I will include myself. I have been involved in a car accident. And normally speaking, when you have a car accident, the first thing, of course, is making sure there was a witness that can corroborate what actually happened when you file the police report. Yeah? But that person must have been at a right place at the right time, seeing exactly what went down, hearing, seeing, and then that person can add an objective voice to the situation. We could go on and on. If you notice, this is the concept of a testimony and a witness is very comprehensive. It covers a lot of different aspects of life. When we come to the Bible and it uses the word testimony and it uses the word witness, it is of the same value, if not more value, because God understands that one of the best ways that He can reach people is working through people. Yeah? So that's why He calls us to be witnesses. He calls us to be testifiers, to give a personal testimony. But this is the key. In order for us to be able to give a personal testimony, that must require us to do what? To have seen and to have heard. Eyes and ears. We have to have a first-hand experience. Otherwise, we're not really going to be fulfilling the role of being a witness or giving a personal test. That's why it's called a personal testimony. Yeah, a lot of people think that they have to become experts in the Bible and archaeology and prophecy and public homiletics and oratory. No, you don't. The only requirement that one must have in order to become a successful soul winner is it's got to be personal. It's got to be personal. You can't share with others the experience of somebody else. It's got to be your own experience. And the closer it is to home, the closer it is to you, the more powerful your personal testimony is going to be. I believe this is one of the many issues we have in church. Unfortunately, a lot of people think that it's the leaders, right? It's the pastor, it's the elders. They're the ones that are supposed to do the work. No. And we talked a little bit about this last week when we addressed the fact that there are certain people that you know that are in your social bubble, that are only in your social bubble as far as the church is concerned. Therefore, the pastor can't reach that person, neither can the elders, because they just don't have access to them. So that's why everybody's got to be involved. And in the early church, in the book of Acts, that's essentially what you find. You find that everybody was involved. There wasn't a hierarchy. Yeah, the church was organized. There's nothing wrong with organization. But everybody was expected to get involved. And one of the best things that you can do getting involved, of course, aside from making friends, aside from building relationships, is sharing with others what Jesus has done for your life. Not only what He's done, but what He is continuing to do. And I think that is so beautiful. Yeah? So these two concepts, seeing and hearing, are going to reoccur in our discussion this morning. And not only are they going to reoccur in our discussion, but if you do a Bible search, if you do an investigation of the scriptures about seeing and hearing in the context of a personal walk with God, you will be amazed because you're going to see that it's almost like a broken record. It's like the Bible is a disc and it keeps repeating itself about seeing and hearing. Not only in the New Testament, you find this concept as well in the Old Testament. So, it says here, our lesson brings out that it is one thing to share what Jesus has done for someone else. It is quite another to share what he has done for us personally. And once again, there's nothing wrong with sharing with somebody what God has done with somebody else. Maybe a friend, maybe somebody that we know that's dear to us who has a miracle story. There's nothing wrong with sharing that with another friend, and God can totally use that. We're not saying that that's not the case. What we're saying is that if all we're doing is depending on secondhand experience, our testimony is not going to be as powerful. Our soul-winning endeavor is not going to be as convincing because it's somebody else's experience. It's not our own. Now, if you have your Bibles, I want to invite us all to go to the Gospel of Mark. Gospel of Mark. Even though the book of Acts is kind of the explosive evangelistic book in the Bible, the Gospels have quite a bit of evangelistic activity, in fact. Well, that shouldn't surprise us, of course, because the Gospels cover the life of Jesus. And there wasn't anybody as busy in the Lord's work, in his Father's business, than Jesus was. He was significantly busier than anybody else has been or will ever be, because every second of life he was committed to his Father's business. Now, Mark chapter 5 highlights an incredible story here, and we're gonna pick up the story in verse 15, and we're gonna go all the way down to verse 20. So right now we're in Mark chapter 5, and we're gonna go from verses 15 to verse 20. Mark 5, verse 15 and 20, and it reads, verse 15. Then they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had the legion sitting and clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. And those who saw it told them how it happened to him, who had been demon-possessed, and about the swine. Then they began to plead with him to depart from their region. And when he got into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. Verse 19. However, Jesus did not permit him. He said to him, "Go home to your friends. Tell them this, what great things the Lord has done for you, and how he has had compassion on you." And he departed, verse 20, and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. This story is incredible. Here you have a man who was demon-possessed. Now, we think, we here in the West, as we call it, right? We think demon possession is a thing of the past, or a thing of some of these movies. But we have to understand that demon possession is something very real. And it's not just something that occurred in the ancient literature. It's something that happens now. It occurs now, obviously in different forms. Demon possession doesn't always manifest itself the same way. But normally speaking, when the concept of demon possession even surfaces, most people, and I think it's logical, it makes perfect sense, they get a little weirded out and they get a little bit, distant. They don't want to get involved because it's something a little bit uncomfortable and kind of quite terrifying, right? The interesting thing is that normally speaking, when we consider somebody to be demon possessed, we definitely would categorize that person to be at the lowest of the low as far as, shall we say, potential, shall we say, possibilities for change and for transformation. I mean, we consider people with addictions sometimes to be like, oh boy, this is going to be a lifelong project or lifelong struggle. But a person that is demon possessed is probably in our mind even lower than a person that has addiction issues. I love reading about Jesus' miracles because what it does is it breaks the statistics. And what it also does is it kind of corrects a lot of our false assumptions. Here you have a gentleman who wasn't very gentle. At one point, he was demon possessed. And the Bible tells us that he came in contact with Jesus. Okay? And when he came in contact with Jesus, when he had an experience with Jesus, he actually went from demon possession. Okay? He went from being demon possessed to having a right mind. Yeah? That's a radical example of transformation. That's a radical example of a miracle, right? Sitting in his right mind, they were afraid, and those who saw it told them how it might happen to him who had been demon possessed. They were like, "How in the world did this happen?" And the Bible tells us that Jesus and his disciples began to get into the boats because they were going to go to their next to the next assignment, to the next itinerant point in their journey. And in verse 18, it tells us that the gentleman who had been demon possessed, who experienced transformation, he basically wanted to volunteer. He says, "Hey, can I join you guys? Can I get involved? I want to travel with you. I want to continue this journey." And Jesus is something a little unusual because the rest of the disciples were invited to join them, right? You would normally think that this brother, this transformation story, he would have been like, "Absolutely, brother, come on in." But to our shock, in verse 19, it tells us that Jesus did not permit him. Jesus says no. Okay, he did not permit this individual who was transformed to join them. Now, this is the interesting thing. Why? Why would Jesus not allow this man to join them? I mean, think about it. If Jesus is trying to spread the good news of the kingdom, if he's trying to share the fact that the kingdom of God is here, and that he is the Messiah, he's the Son of God, and that God wants to plan to save everybody, and that he is who he claims to be. Wouldn't you want to take somebody who has seen and heard along with you to be kind of an example of somebody who has been changed, who has been affected by it? The answer is yes, but the answer is also no, and this is why. Because notice what Jesus is saying here. Jesus is not saying, "No, you can't come with us because you're not good enough." That's not what he's saying. He says, "No, I'm not going to permit you to come with us." Verse 19, he says, "But go home to your friends. Tell them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he has had compassion on you." In other words, he basically says, don't come with us because we're going to a place where nobody knows you. You need to stay here because everybody knows that you were that guy. You were that guy who was demon possessed. People were terrified of you. You were the conversation of town. And nobody's going to have a more powerful ministry here than you. You will have a more powerful ministry than any of us because nobody knows us here. But you, on the other hand, they know your past, but they don't know your present. And if they can see that you are in your right mind, it's going to do a powerful, it's going to have a powerful effect on people. So that's why Jesus said, go home and to your friends. Why? What do you want me to do at home? What do you want me to do with my friends? What am I going to tell them? I haven't been at the seminary. I don't know Greek and Hebrew. I haven't been through one of these elaborate evangelistic meetings. All I know is that I was demon possessed and I have been changed because of your love and because of your compassion. Jesus says that's all you need. That's all you need. He says go and share two things. First thing you're going to share is the great things that God has done. Yeah? Great things that God has done for you. And number two, he says, and how he has had compassion on you. You don't need a master's in divinity, Mr. whatever his name is. We don't even have the guy's name here. Mr. Former demon possessed, now right mind man. You don't need a degree. You don't need to be in formal ministry. All you need is to have a passion for God. All you need is to have a personal experience of seeing and hearing. Not theory exclusively, but something that's tangible. And there's nothing more tangible than a life that was being ruled and oppressed by demons that now has been liberated. Go home to your friends and tell them the great things that God has done for you and share with them the compassion that Jesus has had. Wow, wow, wow. That's what you call a master strategist. Jesus was a master strategist. So as he left to another region, he left a missionary in Decapolis. He left an individual that was going to create a chain reaction simply because he had a personal experience. Home and to your friends. Okay? Home, I'm assuming, involves family. Friends, of course, involves probably colleagues and probably school buddies, right? Etc. Yeah? Now, this is the thing. If we follow this blueprint, we can turn the cities, plural, upside down with the gospel. Because people who come and experience transformation and change, does Jesus still change people? Does Jesus give victory over brokenness and over darkness? Or is that just something in the past? Oh, that's just something that happened in Bible times in the gospel. Now it's a little different. Things are a little different. Is that the case? No. The same Jesus in Mark chapter 5 is the same Jesus that lives today. He has the same capabilities of breaking chains. Yeah? He has the same capabilities of lifting burdens. He has the same capabilities of transforming people's lives. If that's true, then that would basically mean that anybody who's had an experience with God, now granted, it doesn't have to be this elaborate in the sense of I was demon possessed and then I became in my right mind. No, we all have different stories, and many of us weren't necessarily demon possessed to the extent that this gentleman has. Obviously, demon possession takes forms in different things. You know, obviously, demons are involved in controlling the mind, controlling addictions and whatnot. But this individual is a category that's obviously unique. But all of us qualify for being a missionary then and being a personal witness. Because has God done great things for us? Has God done great things for you? When was the last time you sat down and made a list of maybe 10 things, of the most amazing things that God has done for you since you started walking hand in hand with Jesus? Let me tell you something. You want to have a powerful witnessing experience? The great things that God has done is the most powerful thing you can share with anybody, okay? Because it's personal and because it applies to everyone. You understand? It's not theory. It's not intellectualism. No, it's an experience. And if you share that with somebody, that's going to be pretty powerful because guess what? Everybody wants God to do great things in their lives, yeah? We don't really do that. Normally what we think of, okay, what are some arguments, right? What are some debate points that I could use to kind of show people that I'm right? That's sometimes, sadly, that's usually the extent of our witnessing. And if that's what we're doing, we're missing out because that's not really the point. I'm not saying that we shouldn't obviously be well equipped and bringing clarification and explanations to the misunderstanding of what people think about the Bible. I'm not saying that. That there's a place for that. But what we're talking is the heart of personal witnessing, which deals with an experience that you have had with God. And notice what it says here, compassion. Isn't that beautiful? Compassion. How God has been compassionate to you. That's a category. That's a category by itself. He says, share with them the great things that God has done for you and how compassionate He's been to you. It would be amazing for all of us, those of you that are joining us today, to have an exercise. Maybe we should do a Sabbath exercise where we make a list of the great things that God has done in your life. Now, it's very important to understand that when you make this list, that you're not too nebulous. Don't be overly general, like, oh, what are the great things that God has done? Oh, he's given me health. So glad for health. Hallelujah. Okay, we all thank God for health, okay? But we want to be specific, okay? How has God been good to your health? Now, maybe you have a unique health miracle story, yeah? A lot of people have had near-death experiences. A lot of people have had situations that were very bad, and then they came to Christ, and their life turned around, and their health is a reflection of that. That would be a beautiful testimony that you can share. The point is to be specific. That's what we're trying to say. Be specific. If you can make a list of 10 things of the great things that God has done for you, you're going to have an arsenal ready of gospel bullets, okay, to share with people, because people want answers. Is God really who he claims to be? Can people really have a transformative experience with God? And then talk about compassion. But you know the painful thing about talking about compassion? It's painful to talk about compassion because the only reason why compassion is something that's valuable is because the implication is that we were wrong, right? Because we were in error, because we were weak, because we were frail. When you emphasize compassion, you have to come to terms with who you were and even with who you currently are, because obviously we know God's compassion is a constant thing. We don't really like to talk about our bad stuff, right? We want to protect ourselves. We want to protect our image. And I'm not saying we got to air out every dirty laundry with people. I'm not saying that. But we have to understand that the beauty of the good news is because it stands in contrast with the bad news. And the bad news is that we're all sinners. That's just the reality. There's a lot of bad news in our life. But compassion is beautiful because it goes in direct opposition to the badness that we are. Yeah? And what I love about all of this is that it has nothing to do with you. Isn't that beautiful? It has nothing to do, he was a demon-possessed man, but because he was so consistent, because he did the right thing. No, it has nothing to do with you. This is not about glorifying yourself. This man pretty much was down and out, and he was in a disastrous situation. Personal testimony is not tooting your own horn. Amen? Personal testimony is exalting what God has done. What are the great things that God has done and the compassion that God has shown you? That's not the time. Personal testimony is not the time to whip out your resume. You're like, well, I've been walking with the Lord now for so many years and I've been so... No. Okay, that's actually going to do the opposite effect of what the objective is. We want to bring attention to Christ, not attention to ourselves. You understand? So it would be a great exercise. I want to challenge all of us to do that. It would be so beautiful. And I think it'll be a blessing to you as you kind of reflect on your life and try to think of those golden moments in your experience that we just forget because, sometimes life goes on and we forget those beautiful moments of victory that God has wrought in our experience. And when you meet somebody and there's a miracle story opportunity, you can share. Now, miracle stories they're all different because not all of us, again, have been demon-possessed. Not all of us were killers or assassins like the Apostle Paul. Not all of us have jumped off of a bridge and miraculously survived. Some people have, and that's beautiful. But this is the point. It's not about other people's stories. It's about your story. And the fact that you came to Christ and experienced transformation, that's a miracle. Because any human being that is able to experience transformation and salvation, it's a miracle. Okay? So don't feel like, my story is just so boring, it's not as exciting. No. Every story of somebody that comes to Christ is very exciting. Okay? These are things that the devil whispers in our ears to keep us from not being confident in sharing our story. Okay? The lesson brings out here, when the townspeople heard that Jesus had permitted the demons to possess their herd of swine, and that the swine had run over a cliff into the sea, they came out to see what was taking place. Mark's gospel records, then they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed, and had the legion sitting and clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. That's what the New King James says. And the lesson brings out that the man was whole again, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. The essence of the gospel is to restore people broken by sin. I love this. Wow. The essence of the gospel is to restore people broken by sin to the wholeness for which Christ has created them. Wow. You know what the beautiful thing is that, though? All of us have been broken by sin, which means that all of us have the possibility of being a miracle story for God. Amen? Some of us, the brokenness is a little different. Not all of us have the same type of brokenness, Maybe you come from a home that's divorced. You're a child of a divorced home, and that has had a trauma in your life. Guess what? That's the brokenness of sin. That's one example of brokenness. It takes a lot of time to just kind of reflect on your own journey and your own story, to acknowledge what are the areas in my life that were broken. It's a painful assessment, but it's so beautiful because as you acknowledge the brokenness in your life, in your past, you're able to see the great things that God has done and the compassion that He has bestowed upon you in contrast. So, amazing. Statement here from Desire of Ages says, as witnesses for Christ, we are to tell what we know. Amen. What we ourselves have, are you ready? Seen and heard. And she adds another one. And felt. I didn't include that one. I should have included it. If we have been following Jesus step by step, we shall have something right to the point to tell concerning the way in which He has led us. We can tell how we have tested His promise and found the promise true. We can bear witness to what we have known of the grace of Christ. This is the witness for which our Lord calls, and for want of which the world is perishing. Wow! In other words, what the statement tells us is that the reality is that the world is perishing because there aren't enough of these stories. People are not sharing their experiences with God. And the reality is that every church has a bundle of miracle stories clustered together. And all it takes is for those individuals to find the inspiration and the encouragement to share it with their friends and their family, colleagues, school buddies. Sometimes it's just your neighbors, yeah? And we talked a little bit about that last week, about just taking something over to your neighbor's house, some cookies, and starting a friendship, yeah? And then maybe with time you can share your story. Now, you're in the Gospel of Mark. You're in chapter 5. Let's run over to chapter 16. Mark chapter 16, and we're gonna look at another beautiful case here of a miracle story. Mark chapter 16. And we're going to read, this is the last chapter of the Gospel of Mark, and it's really a climax because it's talking about the resurrection. Yeah? So Mark chapter 16, I'll write this over here. Mark chapter 16, and we're going to take a look at verses 1 through 11. We're going to read it rather quickly because of our time. We want to make sure we cover all that we can. Mark 16, verses 1 all the way down to verse 11. It says, now when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices that they might come and anoint him. Very early in the morning on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And they said among themselves, who will roll away the stone from the door of the tomb for us? But when they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, for it was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a long white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He's risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him, as he said to you. Verse 8. So they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Now when he arose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene. Listen to what it says. Out of whom he had cast 7 demons. You're beginning to see the parallel here, right? She went and told those who had been with him as they mourned and wept. And when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they did not believe. Wow. So here you have in the story, you have an example of Mary Magdalene. Now, we know a lot about Mary Magdalene. Number one, we know that she was demon-possessed, right? And the Bible clearly states that she had 7 demons. Not only that, but we also know that Mary Magdalene was involved in prostitution. Okay? Now, ladies and gentlemen, we got to be honest here, okay? We have a guy who is demon-possessed. That's pretty much all we know about the guy. And by the way, he's kind of taboo enough just because he was demon-possessed. Here, and mind you, this is first century. Okay, so the culture, the time, the social norms were what they were. Here you have a woman, by the way, which unfortunately in those days a woman was seen as inferior in a lot of respects. And on top of the fact that she's a woman, she is not only demon-possessed. Not only was she demon-possessed like this guy, but she was demon-possessed with 7 demons. To make matters worse, she was demon-possessed on steroids. And then to top it off, as if the fact that she was a woman and the fact that she was demon-possessed with 7 demons wasn't enough, Mark wants to, and the Gospels include the fact that, of course, she was involved in prostitution. Let that sink in. And let's be honest with ourselves. If a person came to our church, our local churches, with that resume, let's be honest, we would struggle, not only in our interaction with that person, because that's just, unfortunately, that's how the devil works. The devil loves to keep churches impersonal, and he creates hierarchies of sins and hierarchies of taboos. It's just a sad reality. It would affect our interaction with Mary. Yes, we have to be honest. We have to come to terms with the reality that if a person, we got wind that they were demon-possessed, they were involved in prostitution in the past, it would affect the way that we relate to her. It would definitely affect also, shall we say, our involvement of Mary in our ministries. Yeah? Obviously, and we in our leadership, definitely, we would hesitate to involve Mary in our leadership. We will hesitate to involve Mary in our ministries. Why do I share this? Because this is one of the most beautiful concepts of the gospel here. This is one of the most beautiful things about Jesus. He takes what many then would consider the worst of the worst of the worst, and takes this dark individual with all this baggage and makes her the first proclaimer of the risen Lord. I mean, think about the honor of the first mortal human being to have received a delegated responsibility to share to the world Jesus is risen. And notice he doesn't give it to the disciples. On the contrary, she says, the text says, I want you to go to my disciples, because my disciples are hiding, because they're being a bunch of chickens right now, okay? They were being human. They were having a bad moment, right? God chooses a woman who was demon-possessed, who was involved in prostitution, who had an encounter with him. She saw, she heard firsthand her life was changed. Unfortunately, people whose lives are changed, we like to remind them who they were. Yes, even in the church. We like to remind people who they were to keep them, inferior. But according to Jesus, Mary was a champion. And she was a champion. And she was one of the most effective disciples in the ministry of Jesus. She did a lot of things behind the scenes. And of course, it's due, to the culture of the time. It's due to the fact that her reputation wasn't very well. So she had to kind of get involved in what she could. And the beautiful thing is that Mark 16, the climax of the gospel story, you have Mary being the first proclaimer of the risen Lord. This teaches us many, many things. One of the things it teaches us is that it doesn't matter the past that you have. Amen? It doesn't matter how dark your experience may have been. It doesn't matter how shameful you even possibly currently feel now about some of the things that you used to do. It doesn't matter. What matters is, do you have a personal encounter with Jesus? That's what matters. And can you testify that God has done great things in your life, and can you testify how compassionate he has been? And because of that, yeah, the disciples were skeptical. They didn't believe. That's what the text says in verse 10. In verse 11, it says they did not believe. Of course, we know later on, they realized that what she was saying was true, and Jesus indeed rose again. I love this because it really shows us how God sees us. God doesn't see us on a scale of who dresses the best Sabbath morning, who comes from a family of who are well known in the infrastructure and the subculture of the church. That's beautiful. That's wonderful. There's value to that, but that's not. People who don't have that are not on the margins in Jesus' mind. No, this guy in Decapolis, he was in the starting lineup. Mary Magdalene, she was the quarterback. She was the proclaimer of the risen Lord. I can't think of what other honor would be granted to a human being more noble and more incredible than that. So that story is a beautiful story because it shows us, it tells us, and it corrects a lot of our false assumptions. Changed lives make a difference. Acts chapter 4, as our time is flying by here, Acts 4 and verse 13. It says here in our lesson, now when they had saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived, listen to what it says, that they were uneducated and untrained. They perceived that they were uneducated and untrained. They marveled. Why did they marvel? Because they had realized, listen to what the text says, Acts 4 verse 13, that they had been with Jesus. Now, this is so beautiful because what we see here is that in Acts chapter 4, many of the apostles were not educated and trained in the secular and in the formal sense of the term. Some were. The Apostle Paul definitely was educated and definitely was trained. But what we see is that God uses, in the early church, a plethora of different types of people, and those that didn't have degrees were not bench warmers. They were actively involved. They were highly in the trenches. And the reason why, and it's interesting that the text brings this out, that those that noticed that they were uneducated, those that noticed that they were untrained, they noticed that they had been with Jesus. And the point is that the greatest education you can ever have, this actually makes a lot of sense, is if you have had many lectures, and sessions at the feet of Jesus. Now, why do we say that? Well, who was the greatest teacher that ever lived? Who was the greatest professor that ever stepped foot into the world? Well, we know it was Christ himself. So even though they didn't go to the Harvards and the Ivy Leagues of the ancient world or the first century, they had personal one-on-one sessions with Jesus. They saw and they heard. In fact, the text even says that. It assumes that they had been with Jesus, and Jesus, the way that he taught usually it wasn't just sit and listen, but let me show you, let me demonstrate how this works. And maybe we could get into that in one of our future lessons. We'll talk about how discipleship actually works. Okay, so very, very beautiful, very, very beautiful. Acts chapter 4, in this entire chapter, you have this idea of the apostles turning the world upside down. They're turning Jerusalem upside down because they have a personal experience and they're sharing it with other people. and the church really is becoming irresistible. I mean, it's exploding. The church the movement is spreading. Now, in verse 19 and 20, in Acts chapter 4, verse 19 and 20, I need to run over them because Acts chapter 4, verse 19 and 20, after the leaders recognized that they had been with Jesus, Acts chapter 4, verse 19 and 20, it says, "But Peter and John answered and said to them, whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you more than to God, that's your problem. You judge. For we," listen to the text, verse 20. I need to emphasize verse 20. Verse 20, and I'm going to put a star next to it. Listen to what it says, verse 20. "We cannot but speak of the things which we have" what? Which we have what? 2 words. Verse 20. "Which we have seen and which we have heard." You see that? So they were trying to shut their mouth. They're like, be quiet. Stop spreading this news about this Jesus of Nazareth. This guy who was dead and now you claim to be risen from the grave. He says, we can't shut our mouths because we can only speak about what we have seen and what we have heard. This is Peter and John, by the way. Okay? They're telling them, shut up. Stop talking. We can't. You see, because we see Jesus every day. Amen? We hear him every day. By the way, we normally talk a lot about what we see and what we hear. Let that sink in. For example, if we spend a lot of time watching the news, you're going to find especially in the current situation going on, you're going to find yourself talking a lot about possible conspiracies, right? Because there's a lot of things that you wonder, like what's going on. You're going to find yourself getting into a lot of political rhetoric because that's what a lot of the news is. Okay, I'm a big soccer fan. Some of you know that, and if we talk soccer, I have a lot to say. Why? Because I see a lot and I hear a lot. In other words, I'm exposed to the culture of soccer. I'm exposed to competitions. I'm exposed to what's going on. And because of that, I'm familiar with it and I can share. Now, there's other sports. If you talk to me, I don't say anything. I keep my mouth shut because I don't know anything about the sport. For example, hockey. I don't know anything about hockey. So if people want to talk about hockey, I have nothing to say because I haven't seen enough and I haven't heard enough in order to formulate an experience with it. Does that make sense? So we speak mainly about the stuff that we see and the stuff that we hear. Okay? So when we're not sharing Christ with others, if we don't have a fire exploding inside of us, it's an indicator that we're not seeing enough and we're not hearing enough. We need a daily reminder of the great things that God has done for us. We need a daily reminder of the compassion that God has shown for us. Sadly, and I have to say it, this is family talk. Many churches, we find ourselves talking more about gossip, about this person and that person, about criticism of current leaderships, and more so than about the amazing things that God has done. The Sabbath, ladies and gentlemen, is not a blessing if what we do is we come to a Sabbath experience and all we do is share our dissatisfaction of the way things are going. Okay? Nothing wrong with being objective. Nothing wrong to be, man, I think we could have a better experience if we do this. I think we could be more effective if we do that. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's beautiful because it helps us better ourselves and be more improved. What we're saying is, if that's all we talk about, that's a problem. Because the Sabbath is not a time for us to come and critique. The Sabbath is our time to come and celebrate and say, you know what? God is so good. God is so beautiful. And I believe that's one of the most attractive things that we can do as a church to encourage people to have their own experience of seeing and hearing God himself. So much more that I can share. We have, oh boy, we got like 5 minutes left. One What we'll do in our 5 minutes left is I'm gonna give an assignment. Actually, we already have one assignment, and that assignment is to write 10 things, right, on a sheet of paper. But I'm gonna add it to that assignment. Let me get over here so you can see what I'm doing. Okay? So the 10 things of the great things God has done for you. Okay? Don't forget to talk a little bit about God's compassion. But this is what we're gonna do in our 5 minutes left. I'm gonna explain a little bit of a good exercise that can help us become at least somewhat comfortable in sharing our personal story. This is what I like to call our 3-minute testimonies. Okay? And it's very simple. You have first minute, second minute, and third minute. Okay? And this is an assignment. Okay? We're all gonna do this. And maybe we could even do like a cool virtual video compilation. When we're done, compile it and maybe share it with the social media world. We'll see. But one of the things we can do is talk about our life before we met Jesus. Okay? Describe a little bit what your life was before. Now we say 3 minutes because you could always, if the context is appropriate, you could always get into more details. But sometimes you don't have an audience just sitting there for 40 minutes. Sometimes at work you only have a couple minutes to talk and share. So if you can design your personal testimony in 3 minutes, it's a lot more appealing because people normally are going to want to hear more. Tell me more. So before, what was your life like before Jesus? Okay? Then you want to talk about how did you meet Jesus? What were the circumstances that led you to meet the Lord Jesus? What were the circumstances that led you to Christ? How did you get to meet Him? How was the opportunity opened up? How did you feel when you met Jesus? What were you thinking? Take us into that experience, okay? 60 seconds. And then finally, you want to talk about your life now. See, when we talk about testimonies, we really like to dwell on the before, you know? In certain cases, we like to dwell on the before. But really, the clincher is now. How is your life better now? How is your life much more fulfilling now? How is your life more satisfying now that you have Jesus? And if you could formulate that in a way that is personal, okay? Talks about what you have seen and what you have heard. You're going to have an awesome experience sharing your personal testimony, okay? Now, we got to remember, we have to be simple and we have to be practical in our execution of our assignment. A lot of times, especially us Seventh-day Adventists, we like to get theoretical. We like to get way too intellectual. And most people can't relate with that because we need to kind of connect it to our personal experience. Now, obviously, there is a doctrinal and an intellectual component to our faith because especially a movement that has been that has inherited a legacy of prophecy. There's a lot of beautiful insights that we have. But when we're sharing a personal testimony, it's got to deal more with your experience and your journey, okay? This is not the time to break down the 2,300-day prophecy, okay? As beautiful as that prophecy is. This is the time to share with others what has Jesus done in your personal life. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Next Sabbath, what we'll do is we'll maybe cover the last couple of points we were going to cover in this lesson as an introduction on next Sabbath's presentation. So thank you so much for your time. Let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer. Father, we're just thrilled that we can share with others the great things you have done in our life and the way that you have been compassionate to each and every one of us. Help us, Father, to have an internal explosion of the love of Jesus so that we cannot help but share the goodness and the beauty that you have. And we ask all of these things in Jesus' name. Let everyone say amen. God bless you all. Thank you so much for tuning in. Next Sabbath, we are going to continue our Sabbath School, and we'll delve into more and more material. We're going to proceed with our service now. Thank you so much for tuning in. God bless you and happy Sabbath.
There was a silent killer in Yorina's home.
Our family was eventually dying because of our kitchen, because what was produced from the kitchen was not healthy to the body.
It was slowly sapping the life and health of his family. Yorina and his wife got sick. Yorina was feeling worse every day. He felt so sick that he thought about committing suicide. That was until he discovered the silent killer that was slowly taking away their health.
The type of food we were using was already damaged food, overcooked, and all that. When I came across one Seventh-day Adventist evangelist, and I read through some of his literatures, I discovered that I was living a very wrong life.
A ray of hope came when Yorina learned of a health seminar organized by the nearby Adventist church. He asked his wife to go since he was feeling very sick. After the meeting, Yorina's wife came home, equipped with newfound knowledge.
As she made me feeling bad, she started applying water therapy on me straight. What she learned there, she never had idea about that ever. She applied the water therapy, cold and hot water on me, covering me, and before you know, I was sweating. We started having a new lifestyle.
The lessons from the health seminar had a tremendous impact on Yorina and his wife. Their yard, which was once full of chickens, is now empty. In its place, Yorina planted different types of medicinal and health-giving plants like moringa and aloe vera. The plants are all around their house. They also take advantage of fresh fruits and vegetables, which are abundant in Nigeria. Yorina is now living a healthy and happy life. He and his wife are ambassadors of the health message, teaching what they learn to anyone they can. They started building a small space in front of their house where they can teach people about health and the Bible. They've also used this space to start a small Bible study group. But Yorina is just one man, and the city of Abuja has more than 3 million people who would benefit a lot from hearing the health message. This quarter, your 13 Sabbath offering will help build a medical center there. This center will help treat illnesses and show people a better way to live.
I look forward to a medical center that people will say that there's a health facility. When you go there, all you see is love within the health workers there. There's a health facility that when you go there, there's something else you receive apart from the routine things, routine services you see in other health facilities.
Please pray for the development of this health center and for the other projects this quarter. Thank you for supporting the 13th Sabbath offering.
Good morning, everybody, and happy Sabbath. We're going to start this morning in Acts of the Apostles. Sister White encourages us to come into unity in feelings, thoughts, and action. Christ's objective was to bring us into unity with himself, as he expressed in his prayer to his Father. He said that they may be one as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they may also be one in us, that the world may know that thou hast sent me, and hast loved them as thou hast loved me. We're going to start with the first song being Who You Say That I Am. Who am I that the highest being would welcome me? I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love his love for me, who the Son sets free. Oh, his free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Free at last he has ransomed me, his grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me, who the Son sets free. Oh, his free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am chosen, not mistaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not mistaken. I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In the Adventist home, it talks about Christian connections. She says Christian connections are not cultivated enough by God's people. And in these COVID times, this is even harder. But she encourages us that those who shut themselves up and who are not willing to bless others by a friendly association, they lose many blessings themselves. For by mutual contact, minds are polished and refined. Social interactions form friendships, which result in a unity of heart and an atmosphere of love, which is pleasing in the sight of heaven. When we all get to heaven. Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing His mercy and His grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, He is prepared for us a counsels for the church. Sister White says, encourage one another to press forward in the grand closing work in which we are engaged. In the end, there will be a healthy increase in unity and love, which will bear testimony to the world that God sent his Son to die for the redemption of sinners. Divine truth will be exalted, and as it shines forth as a lamp, we will understand more and more clearly the plan of salvation. Standing in the need of prayer. Happy Sabbath, everyone.